So this podcast series spawned out of our MLOps London meetup, which has been running for 4 years with over 3,000 members, mostly practitioners in ML engineering and data science roles. And the idea for this On Air series is to explore how the technical can affect the bigger picture by talking to people influencing and influenced by the implementation of machine learning and AI. I'm Alex Housley, founder of Seldon. We help organizations to take control of complexity through our real-time machine learning deployment platform with enhanced observability for any AI application or system managed your way. So Prerna, I'm delighted to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, so I'll give you a quick introduction. So Prerna Kaul, dialing in from Washington, is an accomplished AI and ML product leader, currently serving as group product manager for GenAI at Panasonic Well. She has over 14 years of experience spanning product management and engineering at organizations including Amazon and Moderna. Prerna has dedicated her career to building cutting-edge AI ML models, platforms, and MLOps services. Yeah, Prerna, I'd like to start by hearing how did you get started in the ML and AI space?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I had a very serendipitous start. I was an engineer working on building big data platforms, real-time Java trading platforms, actually working at Deutsche Bank as well as Citigroup in Canada. And I got very interested in the product management field and decided to pursue an MBA at the University of Toronto. It so happened that University of Toronto is renowned for its 20, 30 plus year investment in AI and machine learning. So Professor Jeff Hinton, for example, who's a Nobel Prize winner as of last year, and several other, PhD candidates who then went on to join OpenAI, Cohere, and other startups were part of that ecosystem. And I was very fortunate. I was selected to be part of an incubator called the Creative Destruction Lab, where I had a chance to take seminar courses with Professor Hinton. And that was nearly a decade back, which was a very exciting as well as a unique opportunity to sort of get started in the machine learning space. And since then, most of my roles have been either on the platform side or machine learning and AI related. I worked at a company called Amazon. Firstly, worked in the Artificial General Intelligence team, AGI team, building out reinforcement learning with human-in-the-loop workflows for Amazon Titan, as well as some of the previous machine learning models that Alexa was using, as well as supporting other frontier models being built within Amazon. And then prior to that, I launched our payment success rate machine learning model at Amazon, where this particular platform, ML platform, is being utilized across Amazon.com, across 55 businesses to support nearly $1.3 trillion in transactions. So a very unique opportunity and exposure. And ever since then, I've worked at other companies, building out everything from GenAI platforms to GPTs. And now in my most recent role, I'm working on building more conversational AI coach use case.
Wow, what an exciting career. And yeah, I couldn't really think of a better way to get started other than working directly with Jeffrey Hinton. That must have been such a privilege. And can you share any insights or kind of pivotal moments from your experience in the Creative Destruction Lab and working alongside Professor Hinton?
Yeah, so most of the coursework was, it was sort of a course-based incubator program, and Professor Hinton was mainly involved in the seminar. So I should say that. Having said that, I think the main learnings I got from that particular program is the VCs and the sort of startup founders at the time were very interested in solving for real world machine learning use cases. For example, speech recognition was a big problem statement at the time, where there was a startup in our cohort trying to detect schizophrenia, um, and other types of diseases, even depression, by hearing a person's voice. And they actually received funding and went through subsequent rounds of funding where they had a very specific focused niche use case that they tried to expand, and then slowly and steadily gain traction across other verticals as well. So one big learning I took away from my time at Creative Destruction Lab was to, I think, have a very focused niche use case when it comes to what was formerly known as machine learning. Now I think everyone just says AI, and then expand from there. I worked on a lot of platform products, and actually, that was also the strategy where we would start by focusing on one business and one problem statement and then expand out. So that has been a learning I've carried forward throughout my career.
Okay, fascinating. And you started out in the early part of your career as a developer, transitioning into leading big data teams and product leadership. So how did that engineering foundation inform your approach to product leadership?
Yeah, it certainly made me. Firstly, I'll say that I worked as a platform engineer, so building out middleware, building out these Java trading systems, and it really taught me the value of systems thinking, because when you're working across, supporting a platform that provides information for traders in 15 odd countries, there are unique constraints around scalability, availability, maintenance, that one has to think about from the get-go. So it really taught me the value of thinking about scale and thinking about how to build a system holistically, which has served me well going into product roles as well, because I can easily empathize with an engineer when they bring up some of these problem statements. I also think it has given me a unique advantage in terms of being a technical product manager, wherein I've noticed this actually with other AI and machine learning PMs who were in early, where they also, similar to myself, came from engineering backgrounds. And so the transition was sort of natural, where they were already interested in some of these problems and just happened to be on the business side of it.
Okay, great. Yeah, sounds like it's come in very useful. And you were talking about the challenges of scaling, and clearly you have hands-on insight at the coal face of deploying and scaling models in some of the largest environments. So what do you see then as some of the biggest challenges that businesses face when trying to adopt AI at scale?
Yeah. And I think this is also sort of evolving, but some problems remain the same. One of the biggest challenges we had originally was in the data prep.
Mm-hmm.
So, in preparation, cleaning, pre processing of data to make it suitable for feature engineering to go into machine learning models. But some of that cold start problem has been sort of taken away as we go into the world of LLMs, where typically most sort of niche use cases would never start from scratch. They would always pick up an open source model and then build on top of it. I think the common theme that I'm seeing throughout is, how do you get to a certain benchmark performance? And then how do you ensure whatever models you're producing are sort of, from a governance standpoint, supporting the principles of responsible AI, safety, privacy? That has been a consistent theme, where getting from, let's say, 80% to 90%,
Mm-hmm.
there is a ton of focused, unique, niche training data involved, and multiple types of reinforcement learning techniques that can be applied to that. It is actually not as easy as it sounds, it's a very ambiguous problem, and you just have to try and test a bunch of different things and try to discover the gaps in your data in order to supplement that with additional training data or more diverse data or a different subset. And then when it comes to actually deploying and launching these models, compute remains a big challenge for a lot of smaller providers. I think some of the companies such as Google, Amazon, the ones that are actually building frontier models, they have uh, compute resources to support this. But I have seen firsthand working at Moderna, for example, where there were internal use cases for LLMs, how much of a big problem compute was, how challenging it was to do fine tuning on some of these models and then continue to deploy them, and how to ensure you could scale, uh, you know, given that you're not operating with a ton of resources. So I do think that that is, sort of the next frontier of problems that is going to get solved in the next 1 to 2 years.
Okay, yeah, fascinating. And yeah, it certainly is an evolving landscape, and that responsible AI is a common thread throughout, from the traditional ML phase through to LLMs. What particular strategies do you take when it comes to evaluating, whether a model is fit for use, not just for solving the business problem, but running in a way which is ethically sound and and all that?
Yeah. So I was part of the team. So I was actually leading the ML quality efforts for our responsible AI workflows in Amazon AGI. And my role was to identify some of the evaluations we could use in order to uh, tell what is the performance of the model, and then improve on those using reinforcement learning and fine tuning.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a very diverse subset of training data, which included everything from, Alexa, customer information, from utterances, utterances that users have, of course, consented to share for training, and violations, policy violations, and political language, like all of these different areas. And one of the key things we try to do is incorporate a diversity of use cases with training data, especially in responsible AI. I have found that it's sort of a three-pronged statement. So there's diversity, there's volume, and there's like depending on the use case, there might be a different quality element as well. So, there are unique metrics that you might have for NLU quality, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So having sort of an annotations quality metric associated with natural language would be another area. So we actually looked at data holistically across these parameters and then source that kind of a training data to solve for responsible AI. With conversational use cases, it's slightly different, where a lot of what we're doing is, yes, reliant on existing frameworks, LLM as a judge, and known evaluation frameworks as well, like Helm, for example, comes to mind, and using existing tools like MLflow internally for evaluations. However, I think the unique value add that especially a AIML product manager adds is in being able to think up creatively how could the user try to break the system from a safety standpoint, and coming up with those unique evaluations and use cases to test these conversational bots.
Yeah, fascinating. And yeah, certainly we've observed that the market maturity has developed more on the kind of model serving deployment side, but still there's a lot of challenges within organizations of leveraging even the tools which are available today for responsible AI, whether that's explainability, bias detection, drift and just broader ML-SecOps. So it sounds like you've been really pushing that forwards and worked with some very innovative solutions in your career. So you mentioned, I think, maybe the concept of constitutional AI. I'd love to sort of get your explanation for that. I think that was something you did in you're working on at your time at Moderna. What is constitutional AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, constitutional AI is something that the founder of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, came up with as the original term. In fact, he came up with it through a paper he had written originally when he was at OpenAI, and then he branched out and started Anthropic. So, constitutional AI is a set of principles, both ethical, safety principles that act as a guiding post when you actually train and deploy frontier models. So it is, you could say it's a flavor of reinforcement learning, wherein with traditional reinforcement learning, what at least the practitioners within Anthropic have seen is you peter out at a certain standard when it comes to certain types of utterances. Like, for example, the kinds of responses that a bot would return for safety questions, like there's some kind of a harmful statement being sent by the user. What is the difference in the responses returned by a model trained using reinforcement learning versus constitutional AI? And they actually have those benchmarks, that you could look at online as well. So constitutional AI is just a set of principles that are used not just in the training process, but also as a gate before a frontier model is launched to the public, where they kind of like test and ensure that those principles are being followed from a safety and ethics standpoint before anything is made publicly available. At Moderna, we happen to utilize Claude for a number of different internal use cases, such as, for example, coming up with prescription information correctly or summarizing that correctly. There was, from a brand and reputation standpoint, there was definitely a proclivity to rely on constitutional AI versus reinforcement learning, and there was definitely, that interest as well, where there was sort of a trust associated with it.
Okay, fascinating. And I guess, was that a major part of your decision to partner with Anthropic, in that they had paid a lot of attention to building into ethical standards versus maybe other models which are have been less rigorously built?
Yeah, so from Anthropic standpoint, I think it was there were several factors to the decision. I think, not to mention, one strong part of the strategy with Anthropic is that they're trying to solve effectively for enterprise workflows. They have the number one model for engineering, software engineering, automation in the industry. And that's been one big use case they've been going after. But in addition to that, there are others where they're trying to look holistically across all the different verticals and solve for enterprise workflows. You may have seen late last year, the computer use feature that had come out, and that was all part of that overarching strategy. I do think Anthropic has been sort of instrumental in making a lot of big shifts in the industry when it comes to how AI and machine learning is actually applied in practical form. What are the ways in which you would experience this, the user interfaces with which how you would interact with AI? Um, Traditionally, for many years, there was only one interface that we heard of, which was a conversational bot. Now you would have different variations and flavors of that, where you might have one that's very static and giving canned responses. You might have more advancement where it's machine learning based and it's able to understand natural language, and then far more when it comes to use of large language models. And for a long time, that was the only one that was propagated and we knew of. And I especially saw that Anthropic strategy was to go broader and look holistically across what can we do with AI persona? How can we think about alignment as a problem space? How do we think about all of the ways in which an enterprise, somebody who's working, an employee might be able to use AI in their day-to-day workflow? So I found that particularly interesting, and that was one of the reasons why we partnered with Anthropic.
Okay, fascinating. It's amazing that we have such amazing technology at the disposal of large organizations as well as smaller ones, people bootstrapping. So speaking to the folks that are kind of just getting started, what advice would you give to companies about going from 0 to 1 with their AI initiatives?
Yeah, I do think that one of the things I've seen companies that are starting with, and I'm in a 0 to 1 space right now, is they would work with experienced practitioners who have been in the AI and machine learning space for a while to define what good looks like before they get started. One approach might be that I fail forward, I start small, I look at all of the online resources and just start building something, build out my use case, build a prototype, and move forward. And while that's good, uh, I think to the earlier point we were talking about, Alex, around scale and availability, maintainability, how do you actually solve some of these hard machine learning problems at scale? It's hard to do that when you go by that approach, because there's just a lot of internal sort of tribal knowledge that gets incorporated as you work in this space for many years. You just know certain things that are not sort of well documented. I can give you an example. So when one thinks about training data and annotations, like thinking about what are the ways in which one can acquire training data, most folks are familiar with human in the loop. They're also familiar with public data sets. You can get all these public data sets online and use that. They may not have fully thought through all the ways in which they could source training data. So, for example, there are companies that provide these proprietary data sets that you can actually buy and get rights to. You can build synthetic data. If you have a data science arm, you can build synthetic data around certain use cases. Actually, the synthetic data performance is now quite good. Earlier, there were a lot of questions around performance of synthetic data vis-a-vis the benchmarks that we know of, but now it's getting better and better, and it's a useful way to augment existing training data already. So thinking about these things holistically, you can then make the right investments as a 0 to 1 to decide where do you want to put your money, given resources are always a constraint with startups. Where do you want to actually put your money when it comes to building a high quality LLM and something unique and something that your users will actually like? Where do you actually want to invest, and how do you want to set up your pipelines? And so there's just a lot of these nuances that can only come with years of practice and being in the industry. What I have seen 0 to 1 startups who are sort of performing well in this space do is set up their practice right from the beginning versus just start small and build it out and fail forward.
That's fantastic. Yeah, great advice. And I guess it must be quite liberating as well to kind of have a clean slate, because within large organizations, regardless of how advanced they are, there is always the technical debt, there's always the existing system. So to be able to kind of start with the latest tooling and build from the ground up is the kind of thing which enables new startups to move very fast and to build on technologies that solve problems in new and interesting ways. So on the question of use cases from the perspective of large organizations as well as startups, like how would you go about prioritizing where to invest in the R&D effort in use cases? Of course, a lot of people are talking today around things like RAG and code generation and enhancing the customer's experience. So, but where would you start in terms of identifying and identifying use cases to solve with AI?
Yeah, I'm happy to perhaps share a specific example if it's helpful to folks around how we've thought about putting in the right investments for Gen AI in other spaces. And uh, during my time at Moderna, one of the things I had to do was to define our overall platform strategy for which generative AI use cases we would unlock and what kind of platform investments we would make for the business. And although Moderna is a relatively small organization, it's nearly 7,000 employees. The the way that I approached this is I did the following three things. Number one, I started with thinking through what does the business actually need, what are their company objectives and goals. And I think as a framework, if I were to offer the listeners a framework, this would still be applicable if you go to any company. But in this particular case, the company objective is to launch 15 vaccines, bring 15 vaccines to market in the next 5 years. With every vaccine launch, it takes nearly 3 clinical trials, and each clinical trial costs around $2 billion in the United States. Which means if one were to bring 15 vaccines to market with 3 clinical trials and $2 billion per trial, that would be about $90 billion. The company only had, and this is public information, 25 billion in cash flows at the time. So if one were to think about sort of the vision and how radical the vision was, it was important to supplement that using GenAI. So that was the first thing, to identify what is the company objective and work backwards. The second thing that I did is I worked very closely with other collaborators on my team to identify all of the GenAI possibilities, everything. So we had a great collaborator who was responsible for learning and development. His name was David, and David did a great job to bring executives from every area of the business in one room and literally create a spreadsheet of information for me. And he said, Prerna, here you go. These are 700 use cases, have at it. And that's just a lot of information to process. So that was the second thing that I did that I found really valuable, because it helped me see the patterns across the business. So across those 700 use cases, I was easily able to group those together by business priority, by vertical, by looking at the number of employees per business. How closely is this particular vertical associated with the revenue generation for the organization? Do they have a real gap that GenAI can solve for? So coming up with those evaluation criteria and then literally combining and grouping those problem statements from 700 into 35. So I did that exercise, taking that from 700 to 35, grouping those statements and putting numbers against it based on the data I had. And I was easily able to see what would be our top 5 and 10 use cases. The punchline of the story is drug discovery was that area where we felt GenAI could have the maximum impact. And then using those use cases, I started working backwards to say what are the platform needs we have. In this particular case, what we decided to invest in is, number one, building our own document pipeline. There was an internal repository of data that was not very clean and not set up for machine learning. So we built our own document pipeline, set up vector databases, set up an open search tool in order to be able to search over that data. Number two, investing in fine-tuning capabilities, which involved, building our own system for compute, hyperparameter optimization, so that data scientists could continuously test and, tune and deploy these models. And then the third was building a proxy API, keeping in mind the principles of responsible AI with some of these external providers, OpenAI, Moderna, and others. So we went through and did that exercise to find key possibilities. And we were actually able to get the resources and the partners we needed when it comes to everything from service providers, like working with an AWS or an Azure, for example, or working with these frontier model teams. Since we had the data backing our business thinking, we were easily able to make that case and then move forward in pursuing that. Is that happy to
Yeah.
answer any follow-ups? Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And yeah, a thorough exercise in cataloging 700 use cases and boiling it down to 35. And so from that point, when you went through the process of building models and moving them into production or even pre-prod, how are you evaluating these from a KPI perspective to measure the success of the AI strategy?
So we did have our own set of metrics for LLMs that we were looking at internally. Everything from accuracy to looking at it from a safety standpoint, policy violations, looking at relevance of the data that it's returning for specific types of agents we were building, having more platform specific agent metrics. Latency, for example, comes to mind, reliability. So having those metrics as well. Mm, and then also having a way for business users to provide feedback. So like a rating system almost, where they say on a scale of 1 to 4, how much do you agree with this? Um, Within Moderna and in my current organization, that's kind of what we used. During my time at Alexa, when I was at Amazon AGI, we actually had a very robust set of metrics that we would evaluate. It was very, very detailed. Think like, 30 to 50 different metrics, with each organization owning about five, and everyone going into like a common meeting to present to our SVP to kind of show the progress against each, and having targets against each for every month or every quarter. So this is how things were set up. I can talk about the specific metrics, but it might go into some proprietary territory, so I'm refraining from it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it does sound like a thorough approach, and I think one of the things that we've observed is just there's such a challenge in moving from the kind of operational and data science metrics and translating that into the business KPIs that ultimately will make an impact on the organization, whether that's from a revenue perspective or operational efficiencies, etc. And sort of tying those two together, I think would you agree, is that kind of an area where like if you were to advise on driving a more effective AI strategy, is just making that connection between the two is critical.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. And during my time at Amazon, we used to talk about inputs and outputs. And inputs are controllable. So some of these lower level metrics that we just spoke about, they're more controllable. But then at the end of the day, if you're not getting the results that we want, then something needs to be adjusted on the input layer. So the output should continue to be revenue and adoption and engagement. And if I would venture out to say, as a PM, that's one of the primary roles we play, is to correlate the internal machine learning AI metrics with that external benchmark that others users would be able to see, but also the business would be able to see. So it's extremely important, and it gets, to your point, gets sort of lost, where it's not clear what's the cost savings or the operational efficiency one generated, how much ROI was generated. That's actually the most important thing, and sometimes it gets lost because we're down in the weeds of the process.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard the stat, maybe it's updated, around sort of 90% of data science projects failing. And I wonder how many of those actually had some impact on the business KPIs, but they weren't able to articulate it effectively. So sounds like you've done some great work there. And so like moving on to sort of the bigger picture, and I was going to ask this earlier, but went down a different track, is just how do you see the role of AI evolving in business strategy over the next 5 years? And I know there's a lot has happened over the last couple of years, but if you can extrapolate forwards from where we are now, and where do you see us going?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I do think, as to your point, it's a complex answer. One clear thing I will say is that I believe, based on my current usage and my usage across other business use cases, that uh, the latest LLMs across the board, OpenAI, Llama, uh, I've used DeepSeek as well, Claude, are very strategic. So if you give them sort of a brief, talk to them over voice and give them a brief on your problem statement, who is your target market, your segmentation, some of the needs you've identified, and what are the problems you're trying to solve. It does a great job of synthesizing. Is my connection okay?
Yeah.
Synthesizing that information and coming up with a strategy based off of principles from books and other material available. So I think that is actually one of the unique areas where AI does quite well. And especially when it comes to business strategy, sort of validating that with an LLM early on might actually be a good idea. So that seems sort of low hanging fruit. If I think very very short term, that's how I'm seeing a lot of folks already use AI for generating these strategy documents, coming up with synthesizing ideas and coming up with patterns and insights from their own data. And that's already happening, and that's very very short term. When I think medium term, more 1 to 2 years, um, and this is already happening today, but I think the latency is coming from organizations being ready to do this. I am seeing traction towards hiring AI agents as employees.
Mhm.
So that is already happening here in the States and elsewhere as well, where for specific things like, let's say, accounting, financial automation, it's it's easier to get an AI agent on board. It's probably faster and cheaper as well to get to the same level of quality than it would be to hire a human. So that is the direction we're seeing the industry go, with a lot of these more repetitive areas that humans end up doing. So that's definitely happening in the medium term. And across all of the different roles, from software engineering to product to UX, finance, accounting, like everything, I think is going to be seeing a very seismic shift in the next 1 to 2 years. um, Also, in the medium term, I see that companies have become very open minded and very flexible when it comes to the use of AI tools to augment their workers as well. So everything from giving enterprise access to use of GPTs, or like Claude projects, to getting more specific and advanced tools like, let's say, a Grammarly for writing,
Mhm.
uh, to thinking about more advanced use cases, like thinking of very specific tools, designed for a specific industry. In my old company, our data scientists were equipped with um, software that helped with sort of semantic search for research documents for their research, because that was a big component of their role. And so they explored a lot of AI tools and solutions there as well to speed up the research process, because they were constantly having to learn new spaces and read a lot of research. So medium term, I'm seeing that. Long term, I think, if I were to be completely honest, it's probably anyone's guess. But long term, I do see that there is we're moving in the direction, and there's enough to evidence to show that we're moving in the direction of human AI collaboration, not just hiring AI agents as employees, but giving them more agency, so to speak, more autonomous workflows being incorporated in different parts of industries and different sectors as well. Everything from robotics, which you're already seeing in the manufacturing industry, thinking about surgical robots, even in the healthcare space, and also thinking about just workflow automation and how do you make these agents more autonomous. In fact, I would recommend to listeners, a great talk by Jan LeCun, who actually spoke about this shift as well. And we can certainly link it for the listeners later on. And I think really, really helpful to see for anybody who's interested in this space.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And certainly the introduction of agentic AI, leveraging LLMs, and as you mentioned, LLMs now have extremely strong strategic capabilities as well. So just to kind of expand a little bit on that theme, we started in the TradML world of effectively superhuman capabilities on very narrow use cases, whether it's kind of some computer vision within some manufacturing use case, for example, for QA. Through then to now having roles which can be filled in an autonomous way. Things like the SDRs, which have a good example is 11x for that. And so how much do you see that kind of moving up the organizational hierarchy to say, okay, we have agents now which are in effect managing swarms of agents, or even, dare I say, people within the organizations? Like, how far up the organization do you see the kind of AI having a meaningful responsibility on decision making and operations?
Yeah, I know this is happening in other industries, but certainly my own, where there's a big rise of the individual, like a senior individual contributor, and organizations are becoming a lot more flat. And one of the reasons is because leaders believe that through reliance on AI tools, senior ICs who have been in industry for, let's say, over a decade would be empowered to grow and make more strategic, high judgment decisions that one would need perhaps 20 years of experience for. And so I'm using that as a data point to say, I believe that AI agents would be able to take on pretty senior roles, ones that you might need at least a decade of experience in any industry, and at least that is already happening. And so there's good evidence, high confidence to show that that would happen. I think it might be a much more low confidence estimate to say we would, in the next 1 to 2 years, see an AI CEO or a CTO. I think that although technically that may be feasible, from a adoption standpoint, industry might not just be ready for that just yet.
Okay.
Because,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's what I think.
Great. Okay. And on the kind of regulatory front, like, what do you think of the role of regulation should be in shaping AI's impact on business?
Yeah, I do think that there is a unique fine balance that regulation needs to play, where rather than slowing down the innovation process of LLMs, they need to define guardrails and then help support the execution and implementation of those guardrails. And one big thing that I see happening is that institutions would start to implement certain compliance policies when it comes to LLMs, and ensure that they comply by those policies if they're launching a new use case or a new vertical there. We've seen that with such types of regulations, even when it comes to, let's say, healthcare, there's the HIPAA, there's FDA regulation. It tends to slow down cycles of innovation. So it's going to be a difficult balance. However, I think that the one thing that governments should do is validate that safety security principles are being followed. That's even something as basic as that is not the case across the board. And I think to a certain extent, it's like not having that information To a certain extent, it's not having any regulation in place. But I'll give you a very specific example. We saw that we've seen in military use cases that AI agents are being deployed for taking certain military war-related decisions with no uber governance around the use of those tools for taking military decisions because it's very country-based. What is the overarching governance around that? Like, is there a body? Should the United Nations, for example, propose some rules around this? We've seen in other areas where AI is being used to spread misinformation. The Cambridge Analytica use case comes to mind, where it was purely these machine learning algorithms were being used to sway public decisions, and that happened to be a big scandal. And there's, to a certain extent, sort of country regulation required there, but that is a very risky area as well, where there's a lot of lobbying and other restrictions that might prevent fair and unbiased models from being available to users. So it's tricky, but I think we are moving slowly in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and certainly, like for certain types of use cases, having kind of a more of an international consensus is important, especially when we're now operating in a world where AI models are increasingly open, as well as the tooling that's available. So thanks, Prerna, for joining us today. I think we've hit our time, and thanks to everyone who has been watching this inaugural podcast. If there's any topics that you'd like us to cover, then please reach out to us at hello@seldon.io. Again, Prerna, thanks so much. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to say before we close off, but it's been great having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and all the best to your listeners, and congratulations on the inaugural show.